Hi, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Robbie Weber with SSTI, and before we begin, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. Everyone right now is in mute mode. That means we can't hear you. We'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to type in questions at any time during the webinar, and then we'll go through them at the end. You can type in questions by using the chat box that's on the toolbar on the right side of your screen. If you don't see the toolbar, you may have to go to the little orange arrow in the upper right of your screen and pull it out. And then you'll see a chat box where you can put in questions. And we have a very good presentation today. I'll get to our presenters in just a moment, but I do want to just tell you a little bit about SSTI. The State Smart Transportation Initiative is based at the University of Wisconsin, and we work with 19 states throughout the country, mostly with the director or secretary of the Department of Transportation, and we work in 3 ways as a community of practice among the states we work with. We sometimes do offer direct technical assistance to our partner states, and we also act as a resource to the wider transportation community. And I do invite you to look at our website, ssti.us, and you'll find all kinds of news items and resources, recordings of our past webinars, and if you want to get notice of future webinars, or if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out every 2 weeks, you can do that at that website. So our webinar today is Bike and Pedestrian Street Improvements and Economic Activity in New York City. We are joined by 2 people that conducted a study of economic activity before and after pedestrian and bicycle improvements were added to several areas, and I just want to briefly introduce them, and then they can say more about the study, and I'll turn it over to them. Eric S. Lee is the president of Bennett Midland LLC, a management and consulting company based in New York. Eric served as a senior policy advisor for Mayor Michael Bloomberg, where he developed public safety policy initiatives. Prior to working in the mayor's office, he was a founding member of the Center for Court Innovation, a public-private partnership that promotes new thinking about courts and communities to solve difficult problems in New York. He holds a master's degree in urban planning from UCLA. And then we also have Ben Sprung, who is a principal at Bennett Midland, and he's been with them for a little over 6 years. He's an expert in conducting in-depth operational analysis and in designing and implementing effective management systems. Most recently, he has developed a performance management framework for Bloomberg Philanthropies to measure the progress of some of their grantee cities in addressing policy challenges. He's worked with a wide range of nonprofits and government clients, and Ben has an engineering degree from Brown. So I am going to turn over the presentation to our folks over there at Bennett Midland, and they should be able to control the slides now. Eric and Ben, are you there? Whoops, hold on. I think I muted you guys by mistake. Okay, you should be okay now.
Hi, this is Eric from Bennett Midland. Are we good sound-wise?
Yes, you're good.
Great. Thanks, Robbie. We are going to work in the following way. I will step through a short presentation about the work that we did here in New York, and then we'll take questions with Ben leading the answers to our questions. So First, I just want to give a shout out to the New York City Department of Transportation for sponsoring this work, and to Nick Turner at the Rockefeller Foundation for his championing of this project and for underwriting part of the cost of the study. What I'd like to do on the call today is 4 things to just give you a little bit of a sense of the context of street improvements in New York City and the research question that we set out to answer, and then describe for you the places and where these improvements were made and what they look like, and then I'll step in a little bit more detail to the methodology that we developed to measure economic improvements and share with you our findings.
Hey, Eric, can you just speak up just a little bit? People are having a little trouble hearing you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Is that a little bit better?
That's a little better. Yep.
Great. So the key research question for this study was simply this. When street improvements are made in New York, did it affect the economic activity at the improvement sites? So to give you a little bit of context, the City of New York Department of Transportation has undergone a very ambitious plan of changing New York City's streets. I'm sure many of you have heard about it. This includes the introduction of dedicated lanes for bus service, the introduction of dedicated and protected bike lanes, a whole number of improvements to improve the quality of the experience for pedestrians. So in the context of this large-scale change in the quality and experience of the streets across the city, they framed the question, are these improvements having any impact one way or the other on the economic activity around the improvements? The picture on the slide shows one of the improvement sites in Midtown Manhattan at Madison Square, which is 23rd Street and 5th Avenue, where 5th Avenue and Broadway intersect. On the left, you see a picture of this complicated intersection of 3 streets as it was before the improvement, with a pedestrian wandering around in the middle of the street. On the right is the condition after the improvement. At Madison Square and at all of the improvement sites, there was a loss of parking when the improvements were made, or, and in many cases also, the loss of a lane for traffic. So the goal for our study was to understand economic impact, and to do so with data that was very closely tied to changes in the economy. So existing research about this kind of question largely falls into 2 categories. One of them is assessing...
Eric, you're fading out again. You're going to have to really speak up, I think.
Okay. Is that any better?
No, you're actually farther away from the phone, I believe.
How's that?
That's better. I think you're just going to have to speak up and make sure that you're near the phone if you're using a speakerphone.
No, I'm not. I'm using a landline phone.
Oh,
but,
okay. I don't know if there's a volume on there, but you were fading out a little at the last couple sentences.
Great. Thank you for the heads up.
Sure.
So existing studies that have sought to answer this question about the impact of improvements have fallen into 2 categories. One of them is where a recent streetscape change was evaluated by surveying pedestrians, surveying bicyclists, surveying business owners, and so forth, also counting pedestrian traffic changes, counting cycling changes, et cetera. So that was one category. And another category of existing research is looking at individual elements of street design, proximity to green space, the addition of bike lanes, other localized features, and correlating those with changes in property values. So the former, we wanted to try and get around the reliance on survey, and the latter, we wanted to be able to work in a shorter time frame to see impacts in a shorter time frame than is possible when you look at property values. So the trick was to answer the question about economic impact using impartial data that's a direct measure of economic activity, and also being able to account for changes in economic activity that occur in a short span of time, And lastly, to be able to do that with economic changes that are happening in a very small geographic area, so smaller than, for example, a census tract area, and certainly smaller than, you know, a county. So I'm now on slide 5. We thought about 3 possible kinds of data that might be useful in helping us answer the question that we wanted to answer. The first was sales tax, and that's what we'll talk about today. But the sales tax data was thought to be something that could tell us about business sales and business sales in very localized areas. We also explored using commercial lease data, so the way that rents were changing for commercial properties in the improvement sites. And the last thing we looked at was the changes in assessed property values. So in New York City, property values are assessed for property tax based on the income that's generated by the property every year. So we thought that that would be a very good proxy for understanding economic activity changes and how that was running through the value of buildings, of commercial buildings. So what we thought about when we were wanting to get to think about study sites was, of course, places where improvements had been made, and also to find study sites where enough time had passed for us to be able to see some degree of economic change. And so we chose as the threshold 3 years out from the improvement. The geography of the study sites is that we looked for sites, we found sites in 3 of the 5 boroughs of the city of New York. So you have in front of you a map of the city of New York with 4 of the 5 boroughs. There are improvement sites that we studied in the Bronx, which is at the top end of the slide, in Midtown Manhattan, where you see a whole bunch of pin drops, and then in Brooklyn, down at the bottom of the slide, were 3 sites. So in addition to diversity in terms of geography, finding sites in 3 of the 5 boroughs, we also had the diversity in terms of the type of condition, the urban condition. So we have high-density central business district sites in Manhattan, and then in Manhattan, the Bronx, and in Brooklyn, we have 2 other kinds of sites, sites that are regional shopping neighborhoods, so strips that are serving a customer base beyond the immediate neighborhood, and then residential commercial strips, so strips that are serving the immediate neighborhood. So just thinking about what the range of study sites looked like, on the slide before you are 2 examples among the 11 study sites that we looked at. So improvements in the slide on the left are dedicated bike lanes with pedestrian improvements at the crossings. So you see a cyclist running up the dedicated bike lane, protected by parking, and at the intersection is this island to ease the way of pedestrians. So that's a very typical example of a study site where there's a loss of parking, and there also is a loss of a full lane of traffic. On the right is, and the image on the left is from Greenwich Village in Manhattan. The image on the right is a intersection in the Dumbo section of Brooklyn. It's intersection of 3 streets or 4 streets where there was a lot of parking and confusing wayfinding for pedestrians. Parking was removed and a pedestrian plaza was put in place. What's not illustrated here and what was unusual among the study sites is there was 1 bus rapid transit improvement site, and that was in the Bronx, and that was a site where both parking and a lane of traffic were lost. Turning to talk about the methodology that we developed for this study. And what we'll do today, we're just going to focus on the sales tax findings, and we can talk about the other stuff in questions. But the beauty of sales tax is that in every improvement site, there were going to be businesses where the businesses were going to be paying sales tax to the state. So stores, shops of all kinds, restaurants, bars, and so forth. And all of them would have economic activity that was reported quarterly to the state of New York as the sales and the tax collected on their sales. So in addition to there being data for every site, the other thing that was great about sales tax is there's very little time lag between when the data is available and when the actual sale happens. So there's a quarterly report, and basically within 6 months we're seeing what was happening on the ground.
Muted.
So the records are very highly localized. They're organized and reported by address. And so we could construct a sales tax file that was about a very specific geographic area, building up from addresses. And then the other great thing about sales tax was that in their filings, businesses classify themselves according to a specific industry, which would allow us to filter by business type. So what we did is for each of the 11 improvement sites, we defined a set of similar sites as a comparison. So we came up with a total of 33 comparison sites. The comparison sites are sort of in themselves in two categories. One of them is neighborhood comparison sites, so streets nearby the improvement. And the other kind of comparison site that we looked for were streets that are like the street where the improvement was made. So Manhattan Avenue or a neighborhood serving strip with traffic going in two directions, etc. So for each of the improvement sites and for each of the comparison sites, we got sales tax data from the New York City Department of Finance, and we got that organized in two industry sectors, one retail trade, so retail businesses, and the other accommodation and food services, so restaurants, bars, etc. And for each of these sites, so for the improvement sites and the comparison sites, we compared the sales in the year before the improvement was made, and then we looked at data for 1 year after the improvement, 2 years out from the improvement, and 3 years out from the improvement. In addition to looking at the improvement sites and the comparison sites, we also gathered data for each borough, each of the 3 boroughs in the same time frame. So just to drill down a little bit more in the construction of the sites and the data, this is a picture of, on the left, the 8th Avenue improvement site that you saw a picture of, though it's a couple of avenues up. This is in Chelsea. And then blown up on the right is the tax lot drawing from the New York City Department of Buildings, which tells us the block and lot number for every building. And by choosing the block and lot number, we were able to make very tailored requests about where we wanted sales tax data, and it let us focus in on the improvement site and in the comparison sites on exactly the area where the improvements were made and where we were looking to see if there was an impact. And also on this slide, you see on the left an illustration of comparison sites. So the circle is around the 8th Avenue improvement in Chelsea, and then, pardon me, the 9th Avenue improvement in Chelsea, and then a comparison site farther to the right. So let's turn to findings. On the chart in front of you are the results for one of the improvement sites, Vanderbilt Avenue in Brooklyn, which is a commercial strip with some residential, which serves the neighborhood and also serves more broadly beyond that neighborhood. And what you see are 3 lines. The black line with the squares represents changes in sales tax collections in sales in the year before the improvement, the dark gray on the right, and then the area with no shading is the quarter in which the improvement was made, and then the sales reported in year 1, year 2, and year 3 after the improvement. So what you see very clearly in the black line is that the improvement site had a very strong trend of increased sales over the course of the 3 years and ends in the 3 years much higher than it began in the first quarter of the baseline year. The improvement site substantially outpaces the rate of growth seen in the neighborhood comparison site, which is the lighter gray line, and it also substantially outperforms the sales in the borough in the business sectors that we're looking at. Here we're looking at a second improvement site on 8th Avenue. This is the site where you saw the protected bike lane earlier in the presentation. Again, the black line are the results, sales reported for the improvement site in the baseline year before the improvement and in 3 years following. The light gray line is the neighborhood comparison set, and the dotted line is the Borough of Manhattan sales in retail trade and food and accommodation and the trend over the 3 years. So again, here, the improvement site outperforms the neighborhood comparison site and also outperforms the Borough of Manhattan. Overall, looking at the 11 sites that we looked at as compared to the 33 comparison sites, we broke the sites into very strong performers, mixed performers, and poor performers. All of the improvement sites, including the poor performers, performed better than the borough in which they are located. Very strong performers substantially outperformed the neighborhood comparison sites, the comparison sites, and also substantially outperformed the borough. Strong performers outperformed both. Mixed performer, Houston Street, outperformed one, but not the other, and the poor performers had mixed results, though they outperformed the borough in which they're located. So our conclusion from the study is that 8 of 11 of the improvement sites were classified as strong performers or very strong performers, which is to say they outperformed nearby and similar sites, and they also outperformed the borough in which they're located. 2 sites were classified as poor performers. No site failed to outperform its borough. And most importantly to us, the results show that when assessed collectively, the street improvement projects do not detract from commercial and economic activity at the site where the improvements were made. They may contribute positively. And with that, we conclude our formal presentation and would be happy to answer questions.
There we go. I had muted myself because we had a little background noise here. So thank you for that. I'm going to actually let Mary ask some of the questions here. I know that we had one person asking whether you knew there were whether there was resistance from the business community when the improvements were proposed, or in general when the City of New York was undertaking this. I mean, do you know whether they had concerns to begin with?
Certainly, it was a political. There was talk about, are these helpful? Are they not helpful? Though there was no particular across the city organized response against the improvements. In individual sites, there may have been different kinds of responses, but I mean, there definitely were different responses at different improvement sites, but it was not a citywide thing. So, one site in particular, not in our study, but and a site where improvements were made, was very controversial in the Park Slope neighborhood in Brooklyn, but across the board, no.
Okay. We do have a couple people asking if the study is published or will be published somewhere with the data available.
Yeah, so we have done this project for the City of New York and delivered the report to the City of New York. The full report will be available once it has final sort of proofreading review by the city, which they are just wrapping up. So I don't know if, Robbie, if you can collect names of people who are interested, we'd be happy to send it to anyone who is interested.
Sure. Well, I can certainly, if you want to send it, to us, we can put it up on our website as a resource. I can also email the people on the who registered for the webinar and just give them a link if there's a place that it's already available or would be available. That would, either way, we could do that. I think we had a couple people asking whether you saw any difference in the results based on the type of improvement, whether it was a bicycle lane, a pedestrian plaza, or anything like that. I don't know how many, did you say how many sites you studied, whether it's possible to make those conclusions?
So one of the things we think that the meaning of the study is of the finding about the changes across all of the improvement sites. So we're quite confident that 8 out of 11 sites where improvements were made did not suffer economic damage is a solid finding. I think there are a lot of questions about the sort of meaning of the individual sites and the changes in the individual sites, lots of things which could have influenced performance separate from the improvement alone. So the findings really have meaning when taken together. So we didn't look at individual sites by type of improvement, and they're not enough of the, we would want to see a set of 10 bicycle lane improvement sites or something like that to do a study that isolated bicycle lanes as opposed to pedestrian plazas or other pedestrian improvements.
Okay. And I think you had answered this, whether you are you able to conclude that these improvements positively affect, I think you said it's still mixed. Is that right, or you can't really say whether they contribute positively to economic activity?
I think, this is Ben speaking, I think there's a strong suggestion that they do because the results were pretty positive. We did have kind of these control groups. At the same time, I think it's not quite, I don't think we're at the level of kind of statistical rigor where we can make a claim that the sites, caused increases in business sales. And I think that's just in part because there's not, I think to do that you'd have to kind of track a lot more things that are going on and kind of control for different things that are happening, which we didn't do. I think because we took a wide kind of geographic range and a wide variety of types of improvements, that the suggestion is there. I think what we know for certain is that they didn't hurt. And I think going back to the resistance question, that's kind of, when there is resistance, that's what people say. You're going to put in a separated bike lane and take away 2 parking spaces per block. Well, that's going to hurt the businesses on the block. You're going to take away a lane for travel. So I think we can pretty certainly say that we didn't see that kind of effect. And we also, one thing we didn't show here, but we also looked at the results the first year after implementation, because you would kind of expect, if something like parking was going to have a negative effect, it would kind of manifest itself right away, I think is a pretty strong theory, whereas if it has a positive effect, you can imagine it might take longer. And we didn't see, construction complete and then there's a drop. So I think we are able to conclude that, but I think as for the kind of stronger positive effect claim, I think we can say that there's a really good suggestion that that's the case, but we wouldn't quite
Okay, great. We do have a question here. How did you choose the businesses to use in your sales tax analysis? Was it only retail on the immediate street, or did you look at businesses within a block or two of the improvements?
We looked, this is Ben again, if it was a plaza type, we looked basically within a block or two. We did kind of a radius of like 250 feet, I think. And but if it was an improvement kind of along a street, we did the businesses facing the street itself. And then in terms of choosing business type, we, lucky for us, the businesses are coded by NYC code, which they self-report. So we we filter the data by there's two big categories. One is retail trade, and one is accommodations and food services, which covers restaurants. So we did those two big categories, and I think we knocked out a couple of subcategories within there. But our goal was just to get the kinds of businesses that are most affected by, just the kind of places where people walk in and buy something, essentially.
Okay, great. Well, we did have a question which you may or may not be able to comment on, which was, of course, this was done in New York City. Do you have any idea whether this would be applicable to smaller cities, especially very small, like downtown, town centers in smaller communities?
Yeah, I think as long as the sales tax data is available, there's no reason why it wouldn't be. I think the only thing that might be a little bit trickier is you can really only do areas where there's businesses. So in New York City, if there's a street improvement on one avenue and then you want to get kind of your comparison avenue, your comparison spot, it's easy to kind of go one avenue over and there's a ton of stores there, and that's your comparison area where the street improvement wasn't made. In a place that's not so, there's not kind of such density of businesses over such a broad area, I think that would be a little bit trickier to do, and you might have to alter that part of the methodology a bit. But I think it should be absolutely applicable to other places.
So you think the methodology is applicable. I think that the question was whether you think the results of these improvements, especially things like pedestrian and bicycle improvements, transit improvements, and probably especially controversial is removal of parking, whether this would apply to a business district in a smaller city.
I'm not totally conversant in the literature about the up to the minute status of the literature on surveys of bicycle lane survey results for bicycle lanes, but my understanding is that it's largely positive. And so I think the thing that would be interesting to do is to be able to have findings that look at economic data to supplement that indication. And we wouldn't speculate about how they're likely to come out, though certainly the indications from other approaches are positive. It would be very good work to do.
Right. I think, a lot of people probably think New York City is a bit of an outlier where parking is less of an economic issue. And I think, people are often skeptical that it would work in other places. So that's probably where the question is coming from.
I guess I would say the one thing about that is there's an interest in this exact, reproducing this methodology in a number of other large, medium-sized cities, and we're really interested to see how those goes and support those. I don't think the New York is exceptional. I think, for example, Washington would be a place where there are some pretty broad street improvements, and very interesting to see what the impact of those are. But certainly it is also a place where there's a certain amount of density and other kinds of transit. Right.
Right. I absolutely agree. I think that's one of the reasons people are interested in this topic is we don't have a lot of research on economic performance, and it is slightly controversial in some places, and people are interested to see what the results are. And I think we'd all like to see more study of this and the outcomes. we do have a question whether you saw any, did you see the increases, do you think the increases were a result of an increase in bike usage? I'm assuming there's already lots of pedestrians. Or were the same number of people on bikes as before the improvements, but they were just more comfortable stopping and shopping?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we don't know. Is the short answer. We didn't look at counts of bicycles. I think to speculate, I think I think it's a fact that bike ridership has gone up in New York City over the last few years. And then, but I would also say it's not just the bike stuff. It's at least for the plaza sites, I would guess that what's happening is that people are coming and there's a nice space to sit and there's tables, and however they get there, they are just tending to hang around that area more, and that's helping the local businesses.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I know that we have seen some research where improvements for bicyclists, not always, but if they're done correctly, often improve the safety of the street for all users. And maybe it just makes it more comfortable for the pedestrians as well. I think I've heard some people say at least they're getting off the sidewalk, and so the bicyclists aren't on the sidewalk with the pedestrians.
Yeah, no, the street safety indicators in New York are very, very positive. I don't have them right off the tip of my fingertips, but they are impressive, and they're also very tightly tracked and available on the New York City DOT website.
Mm-hmm. We had a question about...
No,
go ahead.
As are increases in bicycle volumes, which are also up substantially.
Right, right. I think we talked a little bit about the sales tax data. There was a question about, were there findings from the commercial lease data or the changes in assessed property values?
Yeah, there were. The lease data, we were only able to look at 2 sites because of we can only kind of get data on certain types of buildings. So for those 2 sites, the data looked good. One of them kind of tracked its surrounding larger neighborhood, and one of them outperformed it. And then for the assessed values, we're actually trying to use that as a different way to look at rents, because at least the way assessed values of commercial buildings are calculated in New York City, it's supposed to be based on the building's income. So if buildings gets more, if rents go up, building gets more income, the assessed value goes up. And but again, we're a little bit limited because we can only do it for some building types where that's how assessed value is calculated. So we can only do it for 6 of the sites. But it was kind of similarly positive. I think we had 4 outperforming, 1 mixed, and 1 underperforming kind of expectations set in various ways. So the 2 other data sources basically confirmed the sales tax findings.
Okay, and this is sort of back to, I don't know if you said I think you said you didn't have volume for cyclists and pedestrians, but they did ask if you found a correlation between the success of the improvement site and change in volume of cyclists and pedestrians.
Yeah, that would be a really interesting question to look at, but we did not look at it.
Okay, great. Let's see. Well, we had a question. Was any surveying done, and if so, what were the main takeaways? I don't know what kind of surveying specifically they mean.
Yeah, survey also might have been super interesting, but it was not part of this study.
Okay, great. Let's see. Okay, how do you take into account those sites for which the improvement was greater than the neighborhood comparisons even before the improvements. I believe your first graph showed that the places where you were going to make improvements were already experiencing better economic activity.
Yeah, that's right. I think that actually goes back to one of our earlier questions about kind of can we attribute cause and effect. So I think, you know, there's a suggestion, but we can't. So really what we're saying is, you know, suggestion of positive effect, but what we can really say is that there was no harm. So in those cases, yes, it may well have been that, you know, a street was developing economically and kind of sales were going up, and this happened at the same time. You know, the most we can kind of say is that the street improvement didn't hurt, didn't impede the trend that was already underway. Did it help it? Maybe, but that's pretty hard to tell. But yeah, I think those are cases of kind of, at worst, it's doing no harm.
Okay, great. I was sort of curious, and I don't know if you can tell or not, but before the improvements were made, maybe the discussion about the possibility of having improvements might have changed some of the, maybe not the sales, but the value of the property or anticipation of the improvements might have changed perceptions of the area. I don't know if you can comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something we looked at. It's a super interesting point, and you know, I think as more of these kinds of improvements are made, that is probably something that will loom larger as more businesses kind of think to themselves, well, you know, I'm looking for a location, and I heard that this street is about to get a makeover, so it's more attractive to me. But it's not really something we were able to separate out in any detail.
Yeah, well, we had somebody say, I don't think we have your contact information. I don't know if people have further questions. If they, you know, if you are open to having people ask you questions, your contact information is probably available at Bennett Midland.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone, I'm more than happy to answer emails. My email address is just ben@bennettmidland.com. 2 N's and 2 T's in Bennett Midland.
Okay.
1 N in Ben. Yeah, so please feel free.
Great. And I think we do have one other question here. In addition to the quantitative analysis, did you conduct any qualitative surveys among merchants or property owners? I'm assuming they mean, you know, their perception of how things were going or their feel for the area.
Right, yeah, we didn't, but that would also, I'm sure, be interesting to do, but not part of the study.
Okay. I'm just going to scroll through and see if any other questions have come in. Okay, yeah, somebody asked how they could contact you because I think they're looking at a similar study. And I don't see any other questions that have come in. If anybody does have any, you can go ahead and type them in. And in the meantime, I will just say that I very much appreciate everybody joining us for the webinar. And Ben and Eric, thank you for your participation and this very interesting data. And if you can send me any results, anything that's published, I will make sure to either get that up on our website and or send it to the folks that registered for the webinar because I think there'll be a lot of interest in that. And we do have lots of information on the SSTI website. Again, that is SSTI.us. All of our past webinars are up on our website, and this one will be up as soon as I get the editing done. Make sure that we get it all straightened away, and we'll post it on the website. We have resources, we have a newsletter, all sorts of things like that. And while I've been talking, we do have a couple people who have asked a couple follow-up questions here. Is there any type of similar study that could be done preemptively before the improvements go in? I guess that's sort of a question of, how could you get some of these ideas? I don't know whether how people feel about the improvements going in, or to get a before and after data, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would give you a baseline and a sense. I mean, you may well already have a sense first sight of kind of what business trends are in the area, but this could confirm or call that intuition into question, I suppose. So yeah, it may certainly make sense to look at the sales tax data before implementation. Yeah.
Okay, and then I know that there were a few sites in New York where they removed the improvements, and we had a question about, were there any streets where the types of improvements that you studied, were removed or reversed? For comparison's sake, it'd be interesting to know if the reversal of these features negatively impacted businesses on the streets where removal happened.
Yeah, that's definitely a super interesting question. I'm not too aware. I know they have. I'm sure they have reversed in a few cases, but not something that I'm super aware of. But it would certainly be really interesting to look at. I will say, we do, at least this kind of work. There's, we're limited to only looking at pretty commercial places because it only kind of works when there's a reasonable density of businesses. So, there's a lot of street improvements that DOT does that are in more residential neighborhoods that, whether they're putting it in or taking it out, we wouldn't kind of be able to look into this method. But yeah, that's very interesting to think about for sure.
Right, and I think we don't have a lot of, we still don't have a lot of timeline data because a lot of these improvements are relatively new. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as these become both more common and also where we have more data for longer periods of time.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, especially going through recovery and things like that. Are you, which actually brings up, do you know if there are plans to continue tracking this data?
Yes, the City of New York is exploring putting in place the ability to continue to track this for more sites and on an ongoing basis.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I think that we have, I think we've answered all the questions that came in, and I very much appreciate your participation. So I'll remind everybody that this will be up on the website later on today, and thank you very much for your help.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure, and all the best to everybody doing street improvements.